Before I welcome him to the stage, I'd like to say a few words of introduction. An author, politician, and former international civil servant, Dr. Shashi Tharoor straddles several worlds of experience. Currently a fourth-term Lok Sabha MP representing the Thiruvananthapuram constituency and chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Chemicals and Fertilizers, he has previously served as Minister of State for Human Resource Development and Minister of State for External Affairs in the Government of India. During his nearly 3-decade-long prior career at the United Nations, he served as a peacekeeper, refugee worker, and administrator at the highest levels, serving as Under Secretary General during Kofi Annan's leadership of the organization. Dr. Tharoor is also an award-winning author of works of both fiction as well as non-fiction. So can we give him a round of applause as he takes the stage to lead this roundtable discussion, ladies and gentlemen. I now call upon Neeti J. Chandar, award-winning journalist and independent writer, to introduce our illustrious panel.
Thank you, Paloma. Good afternoon, everybody. It is an honor to introduce such a distinguished panel of speakers. To begin with, Lt Gen SL Narasimhan. He is an infantry officer who served in the Indian Army for 40 years and worked extensively on the India-China border. He served as the defense attaché in the Embassy of India in China for 3 years. His expertise on China spans international relations, internal issues, economy, defense, and science and technology developments. He is a former member of the National Security Advisory Board and was the first Director General Center for Contemporary China Studies, a policy-oriented interministerial think tank of the Government of India. He is presently an adjunct distinguished fellow with Gateway House, Mumbai, adjunct professor with National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore, and emeritus resource facility with the Rashtriya Raksha University. Sir, can we have you on stage, please? Next up, we have Lt Gen Prakash Menon, who served in the armed forces for 40 years and has had extensive operational experience. He was the commandant of the National Defense College and military advisor and secretary to the Government of India in the National Security Council Secretariat. He has authored The Strategy Trap, India and Pakistan Under the Nuclear Shadow. Presently, he is the Director, Strategic Studies Program, Takshashila Institution, Bangalore, Professor Emeritus, Transdisciplinary University, Bangalore, and an adjunct professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. I'd like to welcome Lt Gen Prakash Menon to the stage, please. Ambassador Gautam Bambawale was a member of the Indian Foreign Service from 1984 to 2018. He has been India's ambassador to Bhutan, Pakistan, and China. He was stationed in Washington, D.C. from 2004 to 2007 during the Indo-US nuclear deal, which transformed ties between the two countries. He has been India's first Consul General in Guangzhou, China from 2007 to 2009. At the Ministry of External Affairs, he was Joint Secretary for East Asia from 2009 to 2014. He is currently Distinguished Professor, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Symbiosis International University, Pune. He is also a trustee of the Pune International Center. Sir, can we have you on stage, please? In his career spanning 40 years, Lt Gen Dr. Rakesh Sharma has had extensive operational experience in Jammu and Kashmir, the Northeast, and on the western borders. He trained the Botswana Army for 3 years in Africa and attended the National War College at Abuja, Nigeria. He was in the sensitive Akhnur, Jori, and Cham sector on the line of control. In 2013-14, he commanded the Fire and Fury Corps in Ladakh, facing both Pakistan and China. He is the author of a monograph on the determinants of India's military strategy and is working on another book. Lieutenant General Dr. Sharma currently holds the General Bipin Rawat Chair of Excellence at United Services Institution at New Delhi. Put your hands together for Lieutenant General Dr. Rakesh Sharma. Over to you, Dr. Tharoor.
Thank you very much. How do we follow something like Sher Shah? Those of you who saw the trailer have got a sense of what today has been all about, a glimpse of it, but what an amazing, amazing moment that was. And it's a reminder, I think, of the meaning of why this 25th year commemoration is so important. And I want to thank Colonel David and Renuka for having thought of this, put it together, and organized it with such an absolutely star cast of attendees and speakers. Congratulations. One of the things Captain Vikram Batra is supposed to have said, I'm sure he did, he seems to have had a great gift of phrase that resonated with me when I was seeing that powerful trailer, was that the Indian flag doesn't blow with the wind, but with the breath of every soldier who has sacrificed his life to defend it. And these are the moments we have to remember, I think, as we sit here today. But now we've talked about Kargil all day long, and the topic that's been assigned to this panel is the fallout of Kargil and the strategic challenges in our northern borders. And I think on the fallout of Kargil, perhaps I could just say a few words from my point of view, invite the panel if they'd like to either contradict me or add to it. And then we should, I think, really focus much more on looking forward, looking at the present situation, the challenges. These are all experts who have both worked on the ground themselves, faced the fire and the fury, as we've just heard, and at the same time have trained themselves to think strategically about what this means for India and the way forward. And so maybe what we could do is spend the bulk of this time, we've got 40 minutes, I'm told, on the current situation and the future for us strategically in the north. So I'll try and dispose of the fallout of Kargil in a few major points. I would say that one thing that Kargil taught everybody was that a war between two nuclear powers is actually possible without the use of nukes, of course. I mean, what was expected after the 1998 explosions, the nuclear explosions by both countries, was that there would be, in some ways, a heightened tension on the subcontinent and around the world for a while, but then the two countries would settle into a permanent standoff because no one would dare to go to war with a nuclear power. The Pakistanis blew that theory out of the water within 1 year by launching the Kargil misadventure, which both in their decision to launch it and the manner in which we ended it, actually very clearly established that a limited war is possible between nuclear countries, and that's something which I think has in many, many ways been a lesson that surprised people. In fact, Lahore in February 99, after the nuclear explosions of 98, was less surprising. People thought, oh yeah, I mean, of course, Vajpayee has gone to make peace in Lahore because with both sides having nukes, war is impossible. They may as well talk peace. And yet, within 3 months, we were at war. So, striking fallout. The second, of course, is that the strategic restraint that India showed throughout. General Malik began the morning by mentioning this, the strict instructions not to cross the LOC, the way in which it handicapped us in many ways, and yet it was hugely important in establishing India as the responsible power and leading to my third point, which is that the war was a turning point in the wrong direction for Pakistan's fortunes in the world. Because there was Pakistan irresponsible enough to do what they had done, subterfuge, sending people across, even denying that they were Pakistani soldiers. And there was India behaving with great dignity and restraint. It completely destroyed the equivalence between the two countries in American eyes and in the West's eyes generally that had existed until then. Here was Pakistan irresponsible enough to risk a nuclear catastrophe, India behaving with astonishing maturity and at the same time competence. Pakistan became seen in many, many sections of the American establishment, the political establishment, as well as to some degree in the military establishment, as untrustworthy and dishonest, as well as a country divided and dysfunctional within itself. Nawaz Sharif's visits to Washington to sue for peace and essentially to be given a talking to by President Clinton, but in which he also confessed that he claimed anyway that he was in the dark on what General Musharraf was planning. All of this did not exactly, shall we say, raise Pakistan's stature in the eyes of Washington, by extension of the Western world. So that was the other major fallout, which I think Pakistan is still living with the consequences of all of that. And the fourth and final thing, I think, is the lessons learned by the Indian military, which gentlemen here are far more competent to talk about. I think it re-established, if there was any doubt in anyone's minds, the extraordinarily high quality of the Indian armed forces, the professionalism of the military and the Air Force that was seen in action. And at the same time, it taught the military that after what happened, they could never afford to be caught unprepared again. And that, in turn, has sharpened a number of the techniques the army is using now to keep themselves informed of anything happening in and around our borders. Having said that, some of the reforms that were talked about at that time took a very long time to be implemented. And again, if I can quote General Malik, when I said, when you wrote your last book on Kargil, you had mentioned that there still wasn't a chief of defense staff. Now there is. He looked at me and said sardonically, yeah, after 20 years. And that is part of the problem, that some of these changes that were needed have come, but they've come very late. So those would be my principal points. I'm going to turn to the panel and ask if any of you would like to add to that before we move on to the current situation. General Narasimhan.
Just one point to add. It is on the China-Pakistan equation. That is one of the instances in which the Chinese never came to the help of the Pakistanis. Though at that point in time, Musharraf was in Beijing. And they told him, go and sort it out, don't get into this. So that is one aspect we need to keep in mind whenever we discuss this particular relationship, whenever it comes up in future.
We'll be coming right into that, General Saab. That's a very relevant question. Gentlemen.
I have a slight variance to the role of nuclear weapons which played in the Kargil War. Psychologically, obviously, the nuclear weapons, Pakistan flashed it. There was caution induced both in their leadership and ours. They played, they went to the Americans and so on. But in actual fact, in 1999, when the Kargil War was fought, both countries had no operational nuclear weapons in their inventory. Musharraf wrote about this in his book later on. But the very fact that nuclear weapons play the psychological role is a reflection of the nature of nuclear weapons, that when you flash it, the power of destruction of nuclear weapons is such that it can influence the political decision maker on the other side. So the theory that you could fight a limited war under the nuclear shadow, in fact, is still unproved. And it is better that it be untested.
Well said. It should remain untested. Gautam.
I'll just make one.
Ambassador Bambawale, I should have said. Sorry.
Gautam is fine. I'll just make one quick point, which is about Pakistan itself internally, which is that in 1999, it was a much stronger country than it is today, 25 years later, because its economy is in a bit of a mess. Politically, they're in a bit of a mess. And while we must always be careful of their military's intentions, there's no doubting that, and we should be ready for those possible intentions. Today, India is 10 times as big as Pakistan in terms of its economic size. So I think we have to factor this in mind. Though, of course, we'll also be talking about the China-Pakistan nexus, which is something which we should prepare for.
Absolutely. General Sharma, the last word on this.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you, Colonel David, for inviting fantastic conclave. Now, I've got just one point to make is the point about treacheries. Now, we believe in goodness of countries and goodness of people by culture. Now, we were deceived in 1999, as General Malik has pointed out, in the Lahore visit. By the time the Lahore visit was on, Musharraf was already occupying the areas up north in Kargil. When President Xi was visiting Chennai, his formations were already moving towards the area of Shahidullah and Mazar for exercising, which started in December and finished in February 2020, and thereafter they moved across and came opposite Naxai. So there is a question of treachery of our adversaries, despite of all efforts to make good relationship. And we must not forget that historically we have been taken to task India because of treachery of our adversaries, and we tend to be goody-goody about it. So I think that caution is essential.
That's a very valid point. In fact, if you want, since we can now transition into the China northern border scenario, don't forget that when Prime Minister Modi invited President Xi during his first few months as Prime Minister to visit, and the gentleman was in Ahmedabad on the swing in Mr. Modi's garden, the PLA was already doing a dress rehearsal for what they later did in Galwan by moving into a number of positions and not moving. And let's turn then to General Narasimhan's point that one of the things that we can really segue into in this conversation is the nexus between China and Pakistan. In 1999, China had just had about a decade of rather good relations with India, burgeoning trade, which was growing and flourishing. They had no desire to see that mucked up, and the Pakistani timing was pretty grim from their point of view. So why in 2020, when all this pattern had been continuing, did the Chinese suddenly decide that it was okay to completely upset the apple cart? I should explain, I don't think many of you need the explanation, that there's been a modus vivendi on the border between India and China since 1976. We don't agree where the border is, so it's an undefined border. But essentially what has been happening is that both sides have agreed to leave the other alone until the border is defined. And on 65 patrolling points, both armies used to patrol at different times. Very rarely, because they used to coordinate at the local level. Our generals would tell us more. And they avoided any major misunderstanding. A couple of occasions when soldiers happened to be in the same place at the same time, pointed guns at each other, but not a shot was fired in anger for over 44 years until suddenly, in 2020, the Chinese decided to come to Galwan and stay there. And now I gather 26 of the 65 patrolling points where both armies used to patrol are essentially no longer available to the Indian Army. Now that's a dramatic change. Why did the Chinese do it?
The Chinese themselves have given many reasons for it in our discussions with them. One of them said that, no, you are creating infrastructure. Can you hear me? Yeah. You're creating infrastructure very close to a line of actual control in Galwan. The second thing is, the talks were not progressing very well, and so we decided to push the envelope a little bit. Then the third thing is on August 5, 2019, you reorganized the structure of J&K, which was also affecting our border. Many of these reasons have been given in many of the discussions. But the fact remains, my own understanding of this is that I think the Chinese felt two things. One, in our discussions after Dolam incident of 2017, they were always indicating that we will not forget what happened in Dolam. You guys came in, stopped our construction of road, etc., and so we will not forget it. That is one of the things that they used to tell us. The second thing that came up is that I get a feeling that now the Chinese feel that their line of actual control, particularly in eastern Ladakh, is where they should go, and they now seem to have the capability to push it. So these are many reasons, but nobody can actually pinpoint why they came, but there are any number of reasons that could be attributed to this.
But you mentioned Doklam. Surely, Doklam, the Chinese initiated an military action that had absolutely no other value for them other than being able to occupy heights that could be used against India in the event of conflict. Because the only value of the Doklam Peninsula, literally in Nehru's famous phrase, not a blade of grass grows there. There are not even shepherds grazing cattle there. There's nothing. There's just snow and ice and nothing else. And here these chaps have come. All you can do from there is shoot down on the chicken's neck that connects most of India to the northeast. And they come this way. Our chaps stopped them. We stopped the construction. There's a 72-day diplomatic standoff. And then they withdraw. But what do? They move here and they build the same road down here. So they're back where they wanted to be, which is purely an aggressive action.
I agree. I mean, the reason why we went to stop them was this. This is a tri-junction between India, Bhutan, and China. And there was an understanding that any change of status on the tri-junction areas has to be done with the agreement or express agreement of all the three countries. Since Chinese started doing this unilaterally, we had no other option but to go and stop it. And we stopped it as a thing that is being talked about in many, even in US when we travel, they talk about this. And the way we stopped it was really appreciated by everybody else. But the Chinese wouldn't like it in any way. And so that is something which has been bothering them. In our track 1.5, track 2 discussion, this point used to come up once in a while, say that, no, we haven't forgotten Doklam. So that could be one of the reasons why it happened.
Okay, well, we could equally turn around and say we haven't
Absolutely.
forgotten why you started it.
Absolutely.
General Menon, what about your thoughts on this? Oh, you're sharing a mic? I thought there was... Okay.
No, this mic is technologically complex for two infantry officers. So I think we are missing the woods for the trees.
A little closer, hold the mic up.
I think we are missing the woods for the trees when we look at this as a Chinese attempt or China giving reasons about constructing infrastructure and so on. I think we have to see Chinese actions in the larger context of global geopolitics, which is about China versus the West. When you look at it in that context, then why would you actually think that China would be interested in the northern border? So here's a theory. I mean, this is only a theory. China has been preparing its infrastructure along the northern border for several decades now. It's not something new. We have been slow. We're still lagging behind. But why was it doing so? Because what it has created is that it has now the potential to use the northern borders as a pressure point to pressurize India so that its meager resources, both military and otherwise, are sucked up into the northern borders, because its main worry is not about trying to solve this territorial dispute, but its main worry is about India's role in the larger geopolitics between China and the West. India is big enough, perhaps even strong enough, that it could play a role in the balance of power equations, or at least have the potential to play the role which China fears most. Because don't forget, in geographic terms, in geostrategic terms, India's power comes from the fact that our continental disposition is such that if you see India's continental shape, it juts into the Indian Ocean, and it is in the maritime field where China fears the greatest threat from the West. Because China has to be a power, has to keep growing, has to keep the maritime space, make sure that nobody intervenes. The only nation which can intervene is the West and its allies. Its greatest fear is that if India even just shifts its weight, poses a potential threat, it could make its point worse. So one of the things China fears is about India becoming a strong maritime power. Keep India from becoming a maritime power, you suck up its resources in the continental space, especially around the northern borders. Use your neighbors to keep India contained within the subcontinent, so that it is not able to exert its power outside the subcontinent. That's what it's doing. I mean, if you look at, why do you think China is interested in all our neighbors? Not because they love our neighbors. Very fact that China is primarily doing it because it wants to contain India within the subcontinent. That is the geostrategic move which they are trying to do. Of course, they may not have succeeded, because one of the first things which happened after Galwan was that India jumped into the waters of the Quad. Not that Quad is a military alliance, but certainly there was a shift in posture as far as India's, let's say, getting onto the same space as the West. So I would think that what China has, and if you look at the Chinese constructions which are going on at the northern border, they have come to stay. If you look at the geospatial images available today about constructions along the northern border, both in terms of military and civilian, the pace of its construction is mind-boggling. They are not going to go away, because that seems to be their intention. It should be very clear to us. So to think that we can negotiate and solve the border dispute, we are not understanding the larger picture of why this game is played. Because this game is about the larger geopolitical game. That's what China is worried about. India's heft, whatever it might be, its growing economic size, all this therefore makes India shifting its posture relevant to China's dream of 1941 of becoming a number one power. And I think that is how we need to see why China is doing what it is on the northern border.
Thank you. That was a pretty comprehensive analysis. And so the Chinese want to keep us bottled up in the subcontinent and behind our own borders. And Gautam, you've served in both China and Pakistan. Pakistan has also been a very useful element for China to keep India bottled up, because you stir up the Pakistanis, India has to focus on that, and then that gives them less time to do very much else geopolitically. Tell us how you see the situation.
No, I think at the start we all spoke about the China-Pakistan nexus, the military nexus, and I think that is something which bothers all of us a great deal, especially people like you who are sitting in Delhi, and also us who are sitting in Chennai or Pune or wherever we are. And I think the fact there is that while we are strong enough militarily today to deal with one or the other, if they actually do an operation or an attack together, then we are going to be really stretched, and we are going to be stretched militarily. So that is something which we have been worried about. How we handle it, of course, is something that the military people will have to also advise us. But to go back to that question, I would say that, because the Chinese have never said why they did or undertook either Doklam or Eastern Ladakh. But I believe there are two reasons, and it's broadly according to what we have discussed. One is a tactical reason, the other is a strategic reason. The tactical reason is to keep us under pressure, keep us on the back foot, help get Indian resources into military preparedness so that there's less available for economic development. But there's an even more important strategic reason why they undertook Eastern Ladakh, which is as they rise to challenge the number one power in the world, which is the United States of America, they have to have their own backyard, which is Asia, under their control. And this Eastern Ladakh was a signal for them, from them to us, that, hey boys, you better understand that China is numero uno in Asia, and you better accept that. So I think we have to focus on this larger strategic reason why they undertook Eastern Ladakh, and I think that is the more important signal they were trying to send us.
That's interesting. You said that they want us to devote more resources to the military and less to economic development. But that's not entirely consistent with their economic policy, which consists, in fact, of giving us a lot of things very cheap, cheaper than any other country would, that's actually helping our economic development. Why is it, for example, that since Galwan, our import dependence on China has doubled? We are now importing over $100 billion of goods from China. And much of the justification is supposed to be these are goods we can't get anywhere else, from anywhere else as cheaply. And we are using it to generate economic growth in our country. So there is a slight contradiction there. The Chinese are helping us, in a sense, with economic growth. They are making us more dependent on them. But militarily, they're taking a rather aggressive, I would even say, hostile posture.
Absolutely. I think this is in line with Chinese way of thinking. And we have to accept that while we understand Pakistan and the way they think very well, we need to go a bit deeper into how an ordinary Chinese or how a Chinese leader thinks. And you're absolutely right, Mr. Tharoor, where you said that they are willing to expand the economic interaction between India and China, particularly our dependence on imports from China while taking a strong stand militarily. And the reason for them taking a strong stand militarily is because by 2020, the discrepancy or the asymmetry between India and China from an economic standpoint was huge. China was already 10 times our size in terms of economic GDP and growth, or rather 5 times as big as us. And that was a necessary condition for China to have undertaken Eastern Ladakh. If we had been closer in size, or if the asymmetry between India and China had been less, they would probably not have undertaken Eastern Ladakh. So the solution, if I may jump to that, if you permit me, and if the audience permits me, is the solution for India is simple. It's economic growth, economic growth, economic growth, so that we reduce this asymmetry, not just in economics, but also in military, in technology, in education, and other areas of human endeavor between India and China.
General Sharma, you can tie us all the threads together, the geopolitics and the military.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So the basic question is no two tigers on top of a mountain, which is well understood what General Menon and Ambassador Bambawale said. But having put the geopolitics aside, firstly, I do not agree with this 26 patrolling points that are which can't patrol, because at one time I could count 1 to 65 continuously. So 26 is a gross exaggeration, and unfortunately, the army establishment has also not come out to give the exact figures. I can give a figure, but it's not the audience to give the figure. So 26 is an exaggeration.
But they've still interdicted us in some points.
Yes. Now, the portion is that this border has been malignant for a very long time, to use that word. What the Chinese have created in 2020 is what they say sovereignty issues, as also to protect the lands left by their forefathers. This is what Xi has been saying, that we must protect the land left by my forefathers. So Great Wall Syndrome, they have, if you go back to 59 line, the 59 line actually came to the watershed in Ladakh. They took the watershed on their own side, and the line was on the base of the watershed. That means the Shyok River watershed and the Indus River watershed was taken by the 1959 line. What they have executed now is not come down to the base of the watershed, but on the heights of the watershed. So they have a kind of plateau totally with us, with them, I mean, I would say Chinese, and they have pushed us down from the watershed of the Shyok River all along, right from Karakoram down to Pegongso Lake, and the watershed of the Pegongso Lake, and the watershed of the Indus River, right where it goes to Demchok. So they have got now another great wall kind of a thing created there, thereby converting into a benign border. A malignant border has been converted into a benign border, and they can now go ahead and think about maritime frontiers and competing with the Americans or whoever they want to compete with by having a safer 4,000 kilometers of border, which till that day, and I think, sir, we ought to go back to 2013 before we go back to to Doklam, because there's a graduation to what the Chinese did. At one time, they knew they were prepared to take on this border, and 2013 they gave us the right inkling in the month of April, saying that, okay, we want business. The first time they held on to a territory for 22 days. Then there was a 6-week thing in 2014. Then they came to Doklam, which was 72 days. So the inkling was visible of 2020 in a period earlier. So I would say, sir, that you go 6.5 decades back as to why did Chow and Lai make that line? I mean, Chow and Lai didn't go there. Somebody drew that line. Why that line here? Why not 15 kilometers this way or 15 kilometers that way? It's because he wanted to create the Great Wall along the watershed, pushes down the watershed down to the rivers, and thereby protecting the plateau totally for this one. He's not been able to execute it fully, but I think substantially in places there have been success that the Chinese have in doing that. So they have not reached the 59 line, but yes, they have holding on to the watershed in the eastern Ladakh region. All the other regions, fortunately, we got wiser, and we have done fantastic work in the Himachal Pradesh border or Uttarakhand border or Sikkim or Arunachal Pradesh, where we have now protected ourselves in a manner that since the distrust is so tremendous that we will not allow any more infringements to take place in these areas. So that's what I want to say.
But immediately after Galwan, we took a mountain top, which placed the Chinese at a strategic disadvantage, right? And then, equally mysteriously, we relinquished it a month later, withdrawing from it in ways that did not seem to correlate to any gains in terms of the Chinese altering any of their positions. Why do you think we did that?
So I think the insiders will be able to say better. We were retired and rank outsiders, so I'll speak as an outsider.
I'm asking as an outsider.
Absolutely, sir. No, the ambassador and okay. The fact is, sir, never the tanks have been face to face 150 meters. They were actually never in history we have seen tanks of this kind. And there were always a threat of escalation existing in Rizangla and Richingla because they came so close. And the entire was not occupied. Some features in between Chinese are occupied. Suffice it to say that we were not holding the entire area you were referring to. Mm-hmm. In between, the Chinese had come and put in their fingers into some areas. So there was one issue, which is not come into common knowledge. And second is that there was a threat of an escalation that taking place. And number of times, what one hears it now subsequently, there were opportunities where things at night did heat up in odd 1 or 2 events where the barrels were loaded or when Jan Joshi sits here, he was on tenter hooks to allow the firing to take place. So we came so close to war consequent to 29th, 30th of August 2020 that probably the judgmental way was to say, okay, let's avoid a conflagration which will go out of control.
But General Narasimhan, that implies that we blinked first, right? So that we are the ones who are more afraid of conflict and the Chinese are prepared to flex their muscles even at the risk of provoking conflict.
Let me add something to what General Sharma said about this withdrawal from Karakoram ranges. When we are negotiating with the Chinese, the effort was to get them back to positions which were before the April 2020.
The status quo ante was the
status quo ante was the one. But then, if you are looking at status quo ante for the Chinese, then you can't say I'll have a status quo after 29th of August. So there is a issue there. You can't
negotiate. Could there have been a quid pro quo that you withdraw and we withdraw?
That is the quid pro quo. That one of the reasons why that took place.
Except they didn't withdraw.
Sorry?
The Chinese didn't withdraw from anywhere.
Chinese have withdrawn. Chinese have withdrawn from the northern bank of Pankong. So, see, the 4 points where they came in, they have gone back. The disengagement has taken place in those 4 points. And as part of the Pankong So northern bank, this was happened. And for the benefit of the audience, which is not aware of 1959 line and everything else, I'll just make 2 lines on this. Right from 57 onwards, when we discovered the western highway of China, going through Aksai Chen, the relations had started going down, and there was a lot of correspondence which was taking place between Prime Minister Nehru and Premier Chow En-lai at that time. While initially Chow En-lai actually said that these are old maps, we'll come back to revise them, etc. 1959, for the first time when he wrote that, this is the line that we need to accept. But that letter, if you see, There was supposed to have a sketch attached to it, but there's no mention of that sketch in that letter totally. So that 1959 line, we don't accept as a line per se. So this is the 1959 line, which was actually cutting Aksai Chin and then taking away the 38,000 square kilometer that we talk about. So that is what it's all about. That 59 line is all about. As far as your question on the Karakoram range is concerned, he is right. While we could occupy major portion of it, there were some portions where the Chinese could come in at that point in time. And when we are negotiating for a April 2020 position, you couldn't have held on to it in any case. So that could be one of the reasons. In addition, of course, to disengage totally so that the situation doesn't heat up and then get escalated was another reason why it could have happened.
Gentlemen, yeah, I mean, you've heard General Sharma talking about creating a sort of impregnable Great Wall from the Chinese point of view. Very clearly, they have an interest in any case in ensuring that, I mean, when Deng Xiaoping's famous comment about we leave this conflict to future generations to resolve, that by the time the future generations come of age and this thing can be resolved, two things will have happened. Their economy will have become 10 times more powerful than ours, and their army and everything else along with it. And secondly, that the reality on the ground will have changed, and then we'll have no choice but to accept a fait accompli. Isn't that the strategic policy of the Chinese and for the next generation's worth?
I think we must understand the Chinese moves in context of time and where we are as we are today. One thing we need to probably be clear. Even in the case when we occupied the Kailash range, and till then, the Chinese were not even prepared to discuss the issue with us. It is only after we occupied the Kailash range that the talks began. What does it tell us? That's the important story. I think we need to understand the Chinese operandi of how it's using military power to actually achieve political objectives. Unless you make these connections, military power by itself is of no use. You have to understand what political objectives are being actually achieved. Now, if the political objective can be understood from the style in which the Chinese are using military power, and they've been using it not only against us, but even in the South China Sea or with the others, they do only the small stuff. China is not worried about India sending its troops across the northern borders and posing a threat to Tibet, military threat. China is not worried about that. What they are doing is just do the small stuff so you don't escalate, you bite. I mean, we've been terming this as salami slicing. And you bite, you keep negotiating till the cows come home. And if you're not satisfied with what you got, even if you give it away, after some time, do something else. This northern border is vulnerable in so many places that he can come and sit. But the important point for us to remember, and this is the lesson which we should learn, the moment he does that, we must do something to him somewhere else. That we should be militarily prepared. Then he'll probably be able to deal with this. But in this case, the agreement was about only a particular area, and he said the rest we will discuss later, and we've been discussing it. So he's got us to vacate. He had to also move back in some places, but other places he's still dragging his foot. But let us not delude ourselves that even if we solve this and they come to an agreement, the problem is solved, because the problem does not relate directly to the territorial. China uses the territorial dispute for its geostrategic games. I think that's what we are doing.
Gautam, the Dalai Lama turned 89 last month, and now the thoughts and the speculation about a post-Dalai Lama era are obviously impossible to defer indefinitely. There's still some confusion about what happens next. There is no doubt as to what the Chinese want. This is what they did with the Panchen Lama and with the Karmapa. They kidnap a little boy and they imprison him and bring him up to be their preferred Panchen Lama or their preferred Karmapa, and one day their preferred Dalai Lama. But clearly, the Dalai Lama and the broader diaspora that he has cultivated are not going to accept this kind of Chinese formula. And this is what makes the Chinese particularly anxious, right? Now, the question is, if another Dalai Lama is to be reincarnated and anointed, where can it be? I think the Chinese realize that a Dalai Lama born in Los Angeles or Mysore or even in Dharamsala will have no great credibility. But given that the sixth Dalai Lama was born in Tawang, which is inconveniently for the Chinese on our side of the border, it is entirely conceivable that a new Dalai Lama could be found from that kind of area, sanctified by the fact that a previous Dalai Lama was also from there. In those circumstances, does this constitute a potential military target for the Chinese, that they might actually want to explore a misadventure or a serious military incursion into taking over Tawang, for example, to prevent such a thing happening?
That's a very interesting question. Hadn't thought about it in those terms. So thank you very much, Dr. Tharoor, for bringing up this possibility. The way I look at it, I think the Indian armed forces are ready to defend. So we have the capabilities, we have all the armaments, etc., to defend and prevent a Chinese attack anywhere across the boundary between India and China, even though there's no agreed boundary. I'm using it in a loose way. But I think I want to go back to the point you made about China having selected its own Dalai Lama from Tibet, from the Tibetan Autonomous Region of China. And it is very possible that the rest of the Tibetan community living all over the place, including Los Angeles or Bailakupe or anywhere else in the world, Switzerland, could select its own Dalai Lama. It could be from Tawang, but it could be from Los Angeles or Bailakupe or some other place. And then there's going to be a race for credibility between the two Dalai Lamas. And I think India should clearly back the Dalai Lama selected by the Tibetan communities residing outside Tibet. And if we can get more and more countries, including the United States and other Western nations, to back this Dalai Lama, he or she, because the Dalai Lama himself, the current Dalai Lama, has suggested that the next Dalai Lama may be a woman. So he or she then would have the kind of credibility to challenge whoever Beijing selects as the 15th Dalai Lama. So I think that is something that we need to start thinking about right now and need to support, including, of course, in the Parliament of India.
Sure. Gen Sharma, was my worry for protecting Tawang a bit far-fetched, or you think it could be a legitimate target for them?
So, sir, whatever the power differential that the Chinese would have, which we know they have in technology terms and many other terms, we have distinct advantages in many ways. And we must not underplay our advantages. And our advantages are fighting on the borders, where we know better how to contest. We heard Kargil today. We fought Kargil and Kargil type operations in Hajibir Pass or 13620 through our history. We have been fighting mountains of that height throughout our history. So we are masters of fighting wars on the borders. If the Chinese want to fight the war on the borders, I think we should invite them to do so. It is a good idea. They should have some kind of broken noses. So to say in this century, Chinese can take on any portion of Arunachal Pradesh is far exaggerated.
Yep.
It cannot be done. But then the Chinese have...
In 62, they've taken this.
So 62, sir, we've forgotten it.
Good.
Let's not only talk about 62. We carry the issue too far. But having said that, there is a power differential in technological terms, in space, in cyber, in AI, in many other places. They are so far ahead. SP says of the 44 worldwide technologies, 36 are Chinese are leader even over the United States. So there could be a technological issues which Chinese can browbeat us in many ways. And we need to protect ourselves as also get offensive in those directions. If the war doesn't take place, and war doesn't have to be shooting wars. if that war doesn't take place on the borders in Tawang or any other areas, and the Chinese want to be untidy with us in another manner, we should have the capability to be as untidy. We should not keep waiting for Tawang to be addressed, sir.
Okay, so for the last dozen minutes or so, let's have a big picture conversation. General Narasimhan, I mean, there's clearly an emerging new bipolarity on the global stage between the US and China. When the US and the Soviet Union had their bipolarity, the Cold War happened, and there was really no real contact between the two countries other than the very formal ones. Certainly, there was no economic relationship as now exists between the US and China. There was no human interpenetration to the degree we see with over 100,000 Chinese students in the US, nor was there the kind of economic interconnection that we see with the Chinese owning large numbers of US Treasury bonds and the US being the biggest investor in China and so on. So in one way, we are not looking at a simple reproduction of the Cold War dynamic because the interdependence is so much greater today. Yet, the fact is the two have taken on an increasingly adversarial posture. And when Mr. Trump was president, there was nothing short of a trade war going on between the two of them. So far, we have been relatively lucky in not being forced to take sides. Both sides have, to a greater or lesser degree, accepted that we would be somewhat less than totally amenable to their blandishments. Where do you see this evolving in the years, in the foreseeable future, let's say the next 5 years? How do we see both this Cold War evolving and our own posture? Can we afford to remain non-aligned between the US and China when one of the two is sitting on our borders and nibbling away at our territory?
That's an excellent question. In fact, I was speaking at another event about 3 days ago, and I had covered this evolving global order and how that should be navigated. See, the evolving of the global order started from post-World War, if you take it. It was initially bipolar, then it became unipolar. At the moment, we are trying to get into a multipolar situation. It may or may not happen. Ultimately, it will get into a bipolar between US and China, and then it will become a unipole, which could be either US or China. Over a period of time, it could be China. But if you take many other factors today, there are a lot of reports have come up in the recent past, and particularly in this year, there are a lot of reports have come out. If you take GDP measures, if you take the military power, if you take the influential countries in the world, in the top 5 countries, there are 3 countries which are common: US, China, and India. The other country which factored really well on 2 of the parameters is Russia, surprisingly though. So you find an evolution of this order coming to US, China, and India over a period of time. And that time could be anywhere in the middle of the century and beyond. If you look at that, and if you don't want to get into a kind of a situation where you need to take sides between US and others, the way I think we have been navigating has been extremely effective, at least so far. I'm sure it will be in future also. The way to do that is, instead of getting into kind of a multipolar kind of an organization which are becoming less and less effective over a period of time, I think we have gone in for a small group of countries coming together on a particular subject which they could work on. That is why you find these minilaterals and plurilaterals which are actually coming into play. And India itself has either initiated or joined 40 of such groupings in the last 10 years. So that is one way to navigate this so that you don't get stuck between this particular thing. And the second thing is, by following the strategic autonomy that we are doing so far, I think what we have done is, we have effectively managed the relationship between Russia, India, US, and us. And to some extent with Europe, because Europe was really upset with us that we didn't side with them on Ukraine. So I think effectively we have managed to do this. And I think the way to go ahead is also this. In addition to that, the point which General Sharma mentioned about technology, that is going to be the driving factor in the future. And including China today, if you look at any of their things that are coming up, They talk about innovation too many times in any of the speeches that Xi Jinping does actually. So that is where again you need to go for collaborative kind of development and manufacturing. That is another way of navigating this because no one country, including US, cannot manufacture or cannot be technologically viable on all the factors. It doesn't work like that anymore. So I think there are many ways in which you need to navigate. I think these are few of them. I can keep talking about it, but for want of time, I'll stop here.
That's right. I'm afraid your timer went haywire, Colonel David. So when I began this round of conversation, it was flashing 14 minutes or 13 minutes. Now it's suddenly become 2.25. So we'll have to urge our panelists to have their last word very briefly. Gentlemen, on this broad theme of the global order.
So the world order is in such a stage, has been described in a document which I had also co-authored with many others as being between orders. Now, the larger game is where China is seeking, through the use of power in its different forms, psychological dominance. And it's doing this by advertising its strengths that is going. It talks very much and puts everything out in the thing that we have done this, we have done that. And obviously, they have done quite a lot. Anybody who goes to China comes back very impressed with the progress that they have made. But let's remember one thing. The psychological dominance is China's very important to succeed because China is still a country without very many reliable friends when you compare it with the other side. Although there is a whole lot of space in between where the countries are still thinking. So this psychological dominance is what China is seeking and has already brought out. It will be in the Asian theater where it will spend its energy. Now, as far as India's posture is concerned, obviously, we have played the game. I would quite agree with General Narasimhan pretty well. Our notion of strategic partnership, which means we can partner you depending upon the context. So we can partner China in a particular context, or we can partner the West, and we can exercise strategy. But this game will definitely come under pressure as the competition at the global stage grows. Can India still continue to do so, or will it have to shift a posture? It will be not easy. It will be the greatest challenge for Indian statecraft.
Thank you, gentlemen. Ambassador Bambawale.
I'll be quick, Mr. Tharoor. Thank you very much. The way I see it is even today, if you look at economic size in PPP terms, China is number 1, the United States number 2, India number 3. In absolute terms also, this is going to be true in the very near future, 2030, 2032. And as, in geopolitics, what's going to happen is that number 2 and number 3, which is the United States and India, are going to gang together. I won't call it an alliance, I'll call it a strategic partnership in order to keep number 1 in check. That's my answer to your very pertinent question. Thank you.
Okay, General Sharma.
So, to your pertinent question, and one of the previous ones, I have a short view. That's about economic and technological colonization. Now, China is the powerhouse, economic powerhouse. It's got the largest manufacturing base. Even the United States doesn't have it. It's got the best of value chains. Even if it doesn't produce it, it produces it in Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, Vietnam, and supplies it to everybody else. And if the Chinese have to, if we have to become a Viksit Bharat the way we are wanting to do, it has to be on the shoulders of the Chinese manufacturing powerhouse or the value chains that they have worldwide. Even in Mexico, we just cannot become Viksit Bharat without taking that assistance. We should protect ourselves from being economically or technologically colonized by the Chinese in any which way. And that we have to guard against, because it is simpler to say BYD should establish a plant out here. But if BYD doesn't give us a technology, it is not a worthwhile plant to us. They can go and join up with Adani and make all these solar panels in Gujarat, which now they're wanting to do so. But if the technology of producing solar cells is not being given to us, then it will be technological colonization. So while the future does give an impression that we would have a confrontation on the borders, but there would be cooperation on many other fronts with the Chinese. We need to guard against being colonized and become over-dependent on economy and technologies. I'll rest, sir.
Thank you very much. I think there's a lot to agree on. You had some very interesting insights from everyone. I think there seems to be an emerging consensus that China, on the one hand, wants to keep India bottled up and restricted and slightly off balance here, and India, in turn, wants to use every means, whether it's a strategic partnership with the US or whether it's multilateral, minilaterals, and plurilateral alliances with smaller countries in order to control, keep China contained in its ambitions. So this kind of situation is going to be worth watching in the years to come. I think we can bring this panel to a satisfactory close at this point. The timer seems to tell us we should. Thank you all very much for your attention. And thank you, Generals. General Narasimhan, General Menon, Ambassador Bambawale, General Sharma, thank you very, very much. Jai Hind.
Can we have a big round of applause for our panel, ladies and gentlemen? And I'd like to call upon Area Commander, Lieutenant General Karanbir Singh Brar, AVSM, along with Colonel David and Dr. Renuka, to please do the honors.